What's up, guys? Welcome back to this week's episode of Closed by Mo. My name is Mohammed. You can call me Mo. That's what everyone calls me. And I am a real estate broker and investor in New York City and Long Island. I'm also a fellow house hacker, and I wanted to make this video as a way to talk to fellow New Yorkers who are maybe thinking about buying something in New York, their very first piece of real estate, and those are folks that are also thinking about, how can I make sure I get some rental income from this property to offset my mortgage costs, which is about 95% of the conversations I have with folks. So I figured I'd make another video about it. Without further ado, let's jump right into top things to keep in mind before or after you start your house hacking search process. Let's go. Now, if you have any questions about anything in my video, or if you're already working with someone else or whatever it is, and you're starting or finishing or in the middle of the house hacking process, whatever it is, it doesn't matter if you're working with anybody else, please feel free to reach out to me. I would much rather you ask me any questions versus, making the wrong decision or making a decision from desperation or out of fear. So all my information is below. I hope I'm putting the description, but you can look me up at any other social media apps, Closed by Mo or at Closed by Mo. Now, the first bit of advice that I would give folks, doesn't matter where they are in the process, is work with a local lender. Work with a lender that does a lot of business in New York City and or Long Island, not with just one of those big box lenders like your Chase, your Wells Fargo, maybe your credit unions, things like that. No knock on those guys. I mean, I'm sure they do a great job. I have worked with a lot of clients that have used them. But what happens is when you work with a local lender, they just have a better understanding of the market and they know how to work the files and the loans in a way to make sure that you come out on top. For example, if you're purchasing in New York City, let's say you're buying a two-family house to house hack in, if there's a finished basement in that property, even though it may not be a recognizable ADU or just something that might be habitable that you could maybe rent out to your family, the big box lenders won't really let you use any rental income from that ADU towards your approval. However, a local lender will be able to use or at least recognize that this is something that you can potentially rent out and might let you account for a certain portion of that potential income towards your approval, towards your debt to income ratio, all those fun things. That's why I always tell people work with a local lender. You don't want to be working with someone that's out of state or one of those online lenders or one of those big box lenders that will eventually end up causing issues because they don't really understand the local market, and they don't understand, for example, that a lot of times in New York City for older buildings, there's no CO on file. There's no CO on record because of maybe transitioning from paper records to digital records, that there were some issues, fire, water damage, stuff like that. So a lot of these big box lenders might not recognize that right away. I'm not saying they won't be able to work with it, but when you work with a local lender, it just makes it so much easier, and rates are often comparable, or if not, local lenders might even charge a little bit of a lower rate just to earn your business. The second thing that I would really advise a lot of folks to do, this, believe me, this is something that I run into, especially as an investor, especially as a broker as well, which is figure out what your goals and what your preferences are. Now, I say this with a grain of salt because if you're just starting to look into real estate, or if you're just thinking about house hacking as your very first ever property, you probably might not know what you don't know, and that is okay. Part of a good broker's job is to help you figure all those things out. But the reason why I put this on here as one of my top bits of advice is because a lot of times folks will start the process not really knowing what their end goal is or what direction they want to be headed in, even if you don't know what your end goal is. That's why it's really important to figure that out, and especially tying that back into house hacking. When you're going into this process, you should have an idea. You should say, hey, you know what? My priority might be cash flow. Or, you know what? My priority might be appreciation, because New York City and other high cost of living cities are appreciation plays. They're not cash flow plays. So you as the buyer have to have at least some sense of what your goals are, or at least what direction you want to sort of aim in, because that will let other people in your network, or at least in your team, your agent, your attorney, your lender, know how to sort of frame the conversation in a way to help you figure out whether or not it makes sense, or whether or not a certain deal or a certain property makes sense for you. Remember, what works for other people might not work for you. What's a home run deal to someone might not be a home run deal to you. So you have to usually start from zero and figure out, okay, what is the direction I want to aim in, and then communicate that with your broker. Or at least for me, when I work with clients, I always tell people, you're not going to have everything figured out. That is okay. Part of my job is to help you figure stuff like that out. But you should never rely on a broker or anyone in your party to tell you what is a good deal and what's not a good deal. You should have that criteria, at least a general sense of what works for you, and then you should be shopping against that criteria with the other deals, is what I mean to say. The third factor, I would say the third question I would force people to sort of ask themselves before or while you're doing the house hacking search process is, how long are you planning on living there? Now, the reason I ask this is because time and time again, when we go through the house hacking process, you will find that there's two different U's or two different parts of your brain that are working. The first part is the part that made you want to think about house hacking, which is like that investor type, which is like, hey, I want to minimize my housing costs while renting and even owning, having some property appreciation, tax write-offs, all that fun stuff. And the second part of your brain, or the second half, is thinking about it more from a primary residence type. What kind of home do I want? What kind of neighborhood do I want as a personal preference, not just from a tenant perspective? Those are the questions that you'll have to sort of have to ask yourself. And usually what I like to ask people is, how long do you plan on living there? Because that will help dictate what you want to put more priority on. Typically, I'll see it like a 50-50 split, but sometimes people have never even really considered it. And I say it's important, especially because where you are in your career, where you are in your life, with family, things like that, you might want a place that's more quiet. You might want a place that feels safer at night, for example. Some people have told me that. You might want some place that's busier because you are at that age of your life where you want to be around other things. You want to be able to walk to somewhere like a nice dinner or a nice restaurant, whatever it is. So all those things come into play. So you have to ask yourself, okay, how long can I envision myself here? And the second portion of that, why it's so important, is because New York City and Long Island, these are not cash flow areas. These are high cost of living cities, high cost of living areas. And high cost of living cities, the long-term game is appreciation. So you're not, if you go into it with the mindset of I want to make cash flow from day zero, that's just not going to happen. Usually I tell folks within the years 5 to year 7 is when you'll start to see positive cash flow if you do everything else right, if you're managing it well, if you're updating the leases annually. But that's why I ask people, like, okay, how long do you see yourself living there? So for example, if you say, okay, I only want to live here for less than 4 years and I want cash flow from day one and I'm putting in a low down payment, I just tell people up front, hey, this is not the market for you. This is just not going to work. Look, maybe in markets that are even a few hours away of New York City, at least the cost of living is lower. So maybe the numbers will, pencil out better for you. The fourth thing that I like to tell people, which is a good segue, is understand that this is a long game. If you are trying to invest in New York City or Long Island and you haven't been scared away by the high prices, and you want cash flow and you want to ease your monthly burden or your monthly expenses, and you want all the tax advantages and everything that comes with holding a mortgage on a piece of real estate that appreciates, understand that it's a long game. So I ask people, how long do you plan on living here? What's the strategy? What's your 5-year? What's your 7-year? What's your 10-year vision looking like? You don't have to have all of these answers figured out crystal clear, because this is life. You never know what's going to happen. But have a general sense of direction. Because when you understand that this is a long game and you have a general sense of direction, you can not only weather out all the little ups and downs of the little volatility, but you're not looking at this from something which is like, hey, I need to make big enough margin for this to make sense from day 0 or day 1. It's very rare to happen, especially for folks that are buying for the very first time, because most of the time you're not coming in all cash. You're not going to have access to off-market deals or distressed properties that maybe you can work in a nice enough margin. But even then in New York City, those are very far and few in between. That's why I like to ask people, what's your time horizon, and understand that this is a long game. The fifth thing that I'll sort of leave you with here is something I speak with clients in all aspects of whatever price range they're looking in or whatever they're selling at. There's price, there's property, and there's location. Out of these 3, you must compromise on at least one out of those 3. And in most cases, people cannot compromise on price because you can't go to the bank and say, pretty please can I have some more money? So out of the property and the location, you have to compromise on at least one of those. You're going to find yourself in a lot of scenarios where something makes a lot of sense financially. The property is great, but it's not in the location you want. Or something makes sense financially. The property is horrible, but it's in a great location that you definitely want to be in because it's going to appreciate. You as the end client have to decide what makes most sense for you, sort of tying it back into the point I made about having a general sense of what your direction is, because that'll dictate, hey, what do you value more? What do you maybe want to discount a little bit more? And it's okay, again, if you don't know all those answers right out of the gate. Part of your broker's job is to help you figure out those answers, or at least help guide you, in terms of where you are and where the market may be. But it's definitely good to generally have a good sense of direction, because otherwise, number one, I fear people might take advantage of you. And number two, if you don't know what you don't know, even if you make conscious decisions, you are going to make mistakes. Because you haven't thought about it, you don't have a general sense of direction. You're going to end up buying something that's several $100,000s expensive. And then, a few weeks later, you're going to say, oh my God, I made a big mistake. And it's not like, mortgage and a home buying process is not like you buy something at a grocery store that you can go back with the receipt and say, I want to return it. That doesn't exist. So the more you know. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. Bye.